Hello, everyone. I call the Charlottesville April 21st, 2025 City Council meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Oshrin? Here. Councilor Payne?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston?
Here.
Councilor Snook?
Here.
Mayor Waite?
Here. Thank you. All present and accounted for. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
I move for approval.
Second.
Second. Okay, can we vote? Okay. Motion passes 5-0. This meeting will be divided into three sections. The first one will be now, which is the presentation on where we will hear presentations and discuss various items that does not require a council vote, followed by a closed session. And then City Council will have its regular business meeting at 6:30. And today we're going to be hearing the affordable housing report and housing ecosystem, so all housing stuff today. So, Mr. Sanders, or do we go to Mr. Williams?
I'll just simply say that this, for the benefit of council and public, this is your annual affordable housing update. I think it was 2022 when I did it for the first time and ended my presentation with, and you'll get this report every year going forward. I have happily passed the baton on to Sir Antoine Williams here, who is going to walk you through his update on all this good work.
As if the baton wasn't heavy enough, you had to add "sir" to it.
I'm sorry.
All right. Good evening. I'm Antoine Williams, the Housing Program Manager in the Office of Community Solutions. I'm excited to present our annual Affordable Housing Report. It is a chance for us to step back to see how we are doing year over year against the city's 10-year affordable housing plan as it was adopted in 2021. As it was highlighted, there isn't a requested action required for this. This report isn't required by any kind of regulation. Again, it's just a check-in. At best, it's a mirror or a reflection of how we're doing against the affordable housing plan. And they look forward in context to the affordable housing plan's aims and objectives. In this report is also meant to be our primary accountability tool for staff, in addition to our efforts to track investments and production outcomes from the year FY22 to present. This also helps inform our work plan over the next fiscal year. We use this to measure progress towards the plan's goals. There's a number of specific tasks, if you will, that are kind of highlighted in the plan. And especially around equity, transparency, and targeting of our dollars. In this plan, in this effort, we'll have a broader discussion, particularly about scale and consistency. But as we do, consistent with the plan, we'll discuss our funding investments in essentially three buckets: direct investments, our tax relief program, and administrative costs, and progress towards our affordability goals. Before I get too deep into numbers, if you will, there's an important highlight that I like to highlight today, which is this: our housing staff is making meaningful progress towards meeting one of the pillars of the the funding recommendation in your in the affordable housing plan. And the excerpt of that page is page 25 of 147 of your packet, where it outlines 4 pillars. Essentially, they're stated here: scale, consistency, targeting, in context to the AMIs we serve, and unit analysis. But the highlight here is about transparency. We have started a testing of a dashboard platform offered through a service called Airtable, where we will be able to essentially take data sets and create visualizations and narratives around those and make them public facing. We are going to be testing this platform over the next 60 to 90 days, and hopefully will inform what type of platform that the city needs moving forward. All right, so let's get into it. through FY '22 to FY '25, what we've been working towards is significant and meaningful funding commitments towards the $100 million commitment over 10 years. With that, we're targeting about 1,100 new supported affordable units. You may hear me mention those as SAUs throughout this presentation. We're seeking to preserve about 1,300 units and up to about 2,200 unit households stabilized. Across those funding buckets, if you will, if you were to aggregate that down into what that would mean for each, that's approximately 70 million, 70 million for direct housing investments and 20 million to tax relief and stabilization, and about 10 million to administration, staffing, systems, and oversight. So with that in mind, one thing I want to flag early in terms of what you might want to consider moving forward is that while we're doing well in terms of our effort to spend consistent to the Affordable Housing Plan's recommendation, we do remain in balance in some areas, and then there's some areas where we might want to strategically or more align our funding spending moving forward. One of those areas might be for administrative costs and support, and another area of interest relates to the 30% AMI households we want to service. Wow, I didn't know that was going to present so lightly. If you can make sense of what's in front of us there in terms of visual, it outlines about where we are with regards to our total spend these past 4 years, with a total sum of approximately $58.7 million. Within that table, you can see the percentage breakdown of where those amounts fall. So with regards to direct housing investment, we have about 61% of the total accounted for in the CIP at about $35.7 million. And then we have another 21% accounted for in that total for direct investments that occurred outside of the CIP or after a budget was approved through some other council action, in the amount of about $12.15 million and so forth. You have about 16% of the total that is supported by $9.5 million towards tax relief programs. And rounding that out is about 2% of investment towards administrative costs and capacity building. So again, as I mentioned, we are near 60% of the total affordable housing commitment, almost being met in these past 4 years. So as I mentioned at the opening of this presentation, why that might be significant for you to consider now is where we are with regards to our support and production of units that are meant to service 30% AMI households and less. With regards to that, however, there's a consideration you should all be aware of with regards to a number of those units are set to be met through products and development through our community, Charlottesville Redevelopment Housing Authority. So while that number presents low today, there are planned units within the pipeline that should boost that number up a little bit more moving forward.
Bump up the lower median income percentage?
Correct.
Okay.
So on this table, we break down some of what those direct investments have been in the CIP and that have occurred outside of the CIP. They're listed here. It's aggregated into a total with $35.7 million that have been either designated within the CIP or identified to date, and then another $12.1 million that are identified outside, and they may appear, for example, in the CIP moving forward, but these are decisions that were made that weren't initially a part of contemplation of the budget planning process for that applicable year. I know that was a word salad. Hopefully you follow what the context of that was. Seem follow. All right, great. Now, with that in mind, here's where we can pat ourselves on the back. To date, we have about 900-plus units in the pipeline. With some recent decisions you all made regarding HOPS and CAF grants, that number is now increased another 40 additional supported affordable units to 1,023 units. And within that breakdown, you can see the scale of what's being serviced in those units. So you have about 348 units that are targeting 30% AMI and below. The suggested target for where we should be about 50%. So that number should be a little higher. Respectively, same for 60%. And that target should be at about 30%. Why it's in the red is because we're quite over, right? So we also want to not create defect by creating excess in one area. So it's important that we be mindful of that. And we are pretty much right on target at the 20% range for 80% AMI.
How are you kind of defining what's in the pipeline? So I'm assuming with those like 30% and below units, that wouldn't be incorporating, even though it's in the CIP, like West Haven redevelopment, or
Correct.
is it?
So no, West Haven isn't incorporated in that pipeline just yet. West Haven is going to be discussed in the context of this slide that's before you now, essentially 26 and beyond. And those numbers also, in terms of unit count, will be in that as well. How we are how we're getting to that conclusion through a number of methods, where we're going through agreements, we're going through resolutions, we're going through agenda action items, and then we're also looking at how that funding ask or commitment is designated for what's being offered. So sometimes, for example, in a council action item, you all may be presented a packet about a project that says, within the portfolio of units, we'll have X amount of unit types designated for 60% AMI or 30% AMI. We aggregate that and we distill that into a projection. In addition to that, we get regular reporting for units that have been funded or projects that have been executed, or agreements that have been executed, rather, and projects that are underway. We get that reporting, we distill that down to a reporting. Now, that type of reporting particularly applies to like HOPS grants, CAF grants, or projects that have already delivered from years previous, 21, 22-ish, to get that projection. It's a projection. That's where we want to be. And right now we're projecting in one case to be significantly under, and in one area significantly over that target, and the 80% just even.
Could I ask you, on the prior slide, there was mention of the fact that there are 40 additional units from the April 2025 CAF approvals. What were those 40 additional units?
So that would be a projection. Some of the units, for example, were for like one of the programs, a down payment assistance program, and I'm trying to go off memory here, but it's whatever in that slate of grant applications that was approved in that. And I know Habitat, for example, PHA had some projects, some single-family homes that they had designated as well within that packet.
Because, I mean, I'm just trying to remember
And
whether there were
AHIP had
anything
some
that we
projects as
approved that
well.
had a definite, okay, now we're adding a certain number of units to the overall portfolio, and I don't really remember those.
Can you restate the statement again?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, we just voted on the CAF proposals, I think, didn't we, just a week or two ago?
Yeah.
And I just don't have a recollection of there having been something in there that says, and this means we're gonna have 40 additional units.
Actually, I did highlight it at one of
Take a
the,
look really.
Is this 40 additional or 40 additional maintained or set, like, is it necessarily new or does it count as all three of those categories?
great question. So that's counting all three of the categories, because again, we're speaking of this in context as supported affordable units. So anything that you all have made a decision or dollar towards, we count that in the bucket of supported affordable units. And to your point, Councilperson Snook, you're correct that in the write-up or the resolution, I never stated that unit count, but I believe in one of the work sessions, I did highlight that pending your decision, this could mean 40 supported affordable units added to the
The
program.
reason for my question was not to, to suggest anything unusual or
Right.
improper or whatever, just puzzlement on my part, that I didn't remember us having done anything that said, this will translate to 40 additional units. So what are the things that we did that are expected to translate into 40 additional units?
Great point. So you actually raise a good point too, is like we have to get better at elevating those things so it can be more visible. And within those 40 units, for example, there are projects for AHIP, for rehab. We count that towards affordability
Okay.
stabilization. There are projects from Habitat, for example, for down payment assistance, and the Piedmont Housing Alliance also had some projects within that. That is only 3 examples. I didn't commit the whole
That's
list of
fine.
memory, but
That-
those are the types.
Yeah, that helps me. I guess what I'm wondering is, how are you going to sort of keep track of those on a yearly basis to know, well, for example, if we've made down payment assistance in 1 year, does that now constitute a supported affordable unit for how long?
Right, yes, you're tracking well. Yeah, so exactly, we will track that. The ideal is to get all of these repositories that where we collect information to feed into a dashboard, for example, to where it would inform a response to that type of question. And in terms of applicability and years of affordability, it will be maintained according to the agreement, such that if it's a project that has an affordability period on that particular unit, that for that down payment assistance for 15 years, that's how long we're track it, consistent with the reporting requirement. That's all going to be spelled out in agreements. So the agreements should inform the dashboard as well with these projects. I didn't put a live link to it, but I have a QR code. You can go in and even identify dollar amounts to specific projects and address eventually. Right now, it's just kind of there static, but the idea being that it'll be the most responsive tool at low cost for a smart setup as possible. So my goal is to have everything feed into one stream of information, such that if the city manager or even a stakeholder from the city, and which has occurred actually in the last few months, a realtor calls with a very nuanced question, I can find the information very easily.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I think I was here.
Yes,
Okay.
before we took you off track.
No worries. Let me try to find my notes. Okay, so I'm going to go off memory here a little bit. So in the slide before you, what I aim to present is a whole picture, right? So for you all to kind of just think about your funding commitment up until now is only half the picture. You just recently approved a budget for the upcoming year, but through that budget process, you were all informed about a 5-year CIP program. And in that program is about $52.9 million worth of direct housing investment. Now, as it stands, if this were to hold true, 7 years from now, if I were presenting this report in front of you, what the numbers indicate is that we could potentially be spending over that $100 million commitment by the tune of close to $20 million. So that's what's highlighted there in red as an observation. Again, these are soft numbers because the only real number for you all in terms to consider is that 12.7. That's in FY26, the year you just approved. Councilperson.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So I'm having trouble with my finger counting here. FY '22 through '25 is 4 years? 22, 23, 24, 25. And then 26 through 30 is 5 years,
Correct.
which is 9
9.
total.
Right. So go ahead.
We're talking about 10. Are you just putting that down? Or you're saying that for 9 years, with 9 years, we're well
So
exceeded?
that's the projection or implication even at 9 years. So
Okay.
that's not even
Okay.
counted what might be in that 10th year that you
Got it.
might contemplate towards spending.
And the reason you've got the second column is because that's the 5-year CIP.
Correct.
Got it.
And that's as far as we are at this point, so you will get 31 next time.
Yep.
I would just add as context, I think the affordable housing plan was formally adopted in 2021.
Correct.
But that 10 million a year number was developed in 2018 and 2019. And it was kind of developed on what is our goal for the number of supportive affordable units, and it was developed in that context. Obviously, shortly after that 10 million number was adopted, the pandemic completely exploded the cost of construction materials. So the environment of how many units that 10 million produces fundamentally changed from when it was developed. So I think that's just part of the context of it going above, 100 million over that 10-year period.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're correct. Any further questions on this slide?
You may be going to talk about this in a second, but yeah, so you've got it. There's your second bullet point, administrative capacity. And couldn't one also flip that on its head and say, oh my goodness, we've gotten a whole lot done with not nearly as much as we thought we'd need from administrative capacity? I mean, what is it we think we'd get more of if we fully funded that?
Sure, and that's a fair point, but I would counter by saying that that's also been in a soft environment where a lot of what we've been doing has been administrating, setting up programs, a lot of paperwork, a lot of design, concepting. Now, as it relates to our compliance monitoring program that's going to require boots on the grounds for inspections, additional staff physically to follow up, and that's going to only increase in demand with the number of units that are produced and delivered within the pipeline. So for today, we can hold the line or have held the line, but it would be my best advice to you is to consider that scenario changes in shade once we progress further along with our efforts.
Okay, makes sense.
Well, I remember that in one of the reports, that we've had enough of them that they sort of blur together at this
Sure.
point. There was specific discussion or recommendation out of the $10 million that we think about $1 million of that for what I will term sort of bureaucratic infrastructure.
Correct.
And clearly, we're not there. And I'm just wondering whether that is perceived at this point as a goal that needs to be realized, or as Brian was kind of hinting at, and the other way to look at it is, hey, we've saved some money.
Okay. I'm going to defer that response to my director here.
Mayor Wade, Vice Mayor, and members of the City Council. That's a very important point because currently, actually, while the housing staff is bearing the brunt of the capacity of the workload, some of the projects are fan out actually to other members of the staff to enable us to meet the obligations. And part of this presentation, probably the next slide you will see, you'll be looking at land bank as an item there, and you also be looking at tax abatement. And from all indications, if council chooses to move in that direction, to create a land bank and also to ask staff to develop a full-blown tax abatement program, then that will require an immediate staff resources to meet that obligation.
And just to add what Alex has added or provided for you, I think I'm not sure what exact page, but it's listed in your packet as attachment A. It gives you some additional nuance in terms of what that cost has been or been reflected in terms of those other staff members that have helped us meet that demand up until this point in Table 1, Figure 1. So actually, I think I can go to the next slide here. That is the next slide. So in terms of closing out this part of the presentation, again, there's no action required, but the feedback and dialogue that we glean, or what we glean from the dialogue and feedback from you all will help inform our work plans. And to that extent, what we would like to focus on is sound recommendations that reinforce funding for that deeply affordability, that 30% AMI critical need for our community, to scale administrative support accordingly and appropriately as demand increases, and two of those points being highlighted that might involve also increased demands that relates to the Land Bank Authority and the tax abatement program once eventually there's a decision on that. And then maintaining tools such as the dashboard. Now, the Affordable Housing Plan does highlight a number of cities that created dashboards, and then what myself and the compliance officer within the Office of Community Solutions have found is that a number of those cities, those dashboards have kind of gone unmaintained. And so the information is only as good as it can remain current, and that will require a staff level to support that. And then I've listed a few questions for council, just to kind of start the discussion as prompts. But at this point, I'll pause for any feedback or ideas from you all.
So those are some questions, but I think we all definitely support that. But just general discussion, questions in general, Michael. This is something you've been involved in for a long time, so I don't know if you have any questions or comments at this point.
Sure. I mean, well, I would just start to say, I think, even though the report clearly highlights that there's more to do, I do think it's a major success story, and that I think we still have the highest per capita investment in affordable housing in Virginia, one of the highest on the East Coast. And, when you're talking about affordable housing, certainly at 50% AMI or below, you're talking about a product that the market is just never going to produce because it's losing money every month. And it's an area where it has to be stepped in from local, state, and federal government to invest in it as a public good. And most localities don't do that because it's extremely expensive, as we see in this report. There's no avoiding that it costs a lot of public money. And I think it's a huge success story that we've made this commitment, and we are seeing a lot of projects coming through to completion. To the questions, I guess, I would say, I definitely think it makes sense to continue supporting, that prioritization of the deeply affordable housing, recognizing that once you're getting 30% AMI or below, it just gets more and more expensive. So it is a proposition that to meet that goal, it may require the city to commit even more money than we do right now. And I think that's just the reality of it, because the situation of how much projects cost has just really fundamentally changed since 2018 and 2019, and will probably continue to change with situations with tariffs and supply chains. So I would add on to that, when I see that we're going above that $100 million total commitment, to me, I also think that's unavoidable if we're going to maintain our commitment to building the number of units we wanted to see, because the cost per unit has just gone up and it's going to continue to go up. And so I think we should anticipate that we will go above $100 million over that 10-year period. And I think it sounds like we're moving in the direction for CIP projects and kind of having a more formal process to evaluate proposals that would be for affordable housing in the CIP, and I think it makes total sense to do that and try to evaluate them on how many units are being, basically what's the cost benefit analysis of number of units, AMI levels, years of affordability. To some extent, it's a little unavoidable that sometimes projects are kind of opportunistic when you have pieces of land come for sale or long-standing affordable housing that's risking losing its affordability. But to the best that we can kind of systemize, like, what is the cost-benefit analysis of, are we getting the most affordable units at the deepest AMI levels for the longest period of time, and being able to see, like, this project does that better than this one, I think definitely makes sense. And I would also add, I think it would make sense to amend our affordable housing plan to just be very clear that money that comes in from payment in lieu fees, which we're going to get over the next couple years, very significant ones with the Verve and the other student apartment project, that we're just very clear that that money that comes in should be viewed as above and on top our existing $10 million a year commitment, and not considered to just cover it. I think it should go, again, just be very clear on that, which we've kind of informally stated maybe that's how we view it, but there's nothing in writing to kind of solidify that. So I guess those are my initial thoughts before the next presentation on the land bank and tax abatement program.
Thank you for those.
Natalie, you have
Yes, so I I'm excited to hear kind of the next two presentations, but obviously we'll wait to chat more about that. But I think Michael makes several good points about how the cost for development has skyrocketed in the last several years. And so I kind of I agree with a lot of what he said, and I have some other expanded ideas to expand on that as well. The dollars that we spend, the public dollars we spend on things like vouchers and rapid rehousing and all of that can stretch further the more available units we have, whether or not they are built initially to be part of the deeply affordable housing supply or just regular market rate units, and there's enough of them that we have more options. And revenues from residential units are higher than a lot of other uses and most than many other uses. For example, we know an apartment building generates better tax revenue for the city than a parking lot. Even if we do a tax abatement program, we'll get to that in a little bit. Eventually, the idea is eventually once the abatement period is over, we're seeing those revenues again. And in the meantime, we've created we've allowed more housing to be created for people. So with the cost of the projects increasing, there's all the more reason for the city to do what it can to reduce the administrative and regulatory costs and encourage private development that does not require as significant a public investment, because we'll see the benefits of that in the housing ladder. People will move up to a new unit if they can, leaving their old unit available, and cycle down that way so that at all levels, housing abundance can contribute to affordability. So it's yes and.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, one of the things I'm struck by on those lists are the sort of opportunities that came up, the Dogwood and the mobile home park, and the fact that we were nimble and willing to get creative and take advantage of those. Sometimes it was an emergency situation, which we felt compelled to act. But I think another thing is that, as I believe a number of those were paid for with the money from COVID relief. Is that correct? No.
Surplus.
Surplus, okay. Of which we might not have as much in the future. The other thing I'm struck with is how many of them come from longstanding and really good partnerships with CRHA and with PHA and with Habitat and with other folks. So I think we're really, really fortunate to have that kind of set of partners in the community to work with. So perhaps some of the administrative costs that we might have taken up or spent because we've got good partnerships with people, maybe that's why we don't have to spend as much money on that.
That's a great point.
So I just want to acknowledge the fact that I think that on the whole, we've demonstrated a willingness to take advantage of opportunities, and that we've got a really active nonprofit space that we're good partners with, and yeah, I look forward to more good things to come.
Lloyd, you have anything?
Yeah, the risk of disagreeing with one of my colleagues up here, I don't regard it as decided that the money from the Verve and other similar projects, the payments in lieu, are going to be on top of any commitment to spend $10 million a year. And I say that with a couple of things in mind. The first is that we are also being asked to make commitments to purchase a whole bunch more buses, to hire a bunch more people to drive those buses. We are also being asked to make a number of other commitments that, and I put them in quotes because I don't regard anything that's purely a matter of a budget as a commitment on the scale of my wedding ring, for example. That's a commitment to an individual person. That's that I'm not, that survives pandemics and everything else. But as we balance budgetary priorities, whether we're talking about transit or rebuilding our schools, or whether we're talking about housing. These are all things that we are committed to in a general sense, but I think we need to avoid the suggestion that there is a true commitment that says this is an inviolable thing, that I don't care what the other budgetary conditions may look like, we're going to adhere to this. And that's, to me, what a commitment would be, and I don't think we're in a position to make a commitment in that sense. So if and when the money comes through for the Verve and the other projects, I, for one, am going to look at it on an individualized basis in a particular year to say, okay, we'll make the accommodation in this way, but not in that way. And then the difference, there may be a difference from one year to the next. There may be a difference depending on what our plans are on things like housing, and we know that things like transit, and we know that those are related, and you absolutely have to see them as being related. So I'm simply saying this to try to make sure that people understand that A, council has not made a decision that even is binding among ourselves. B, we don't have the power to bind future councils in any event. And C, that when we make these determinations, when the money comes in and the new budget year comes along, there will be individualized circumstances that may be different for any particular year.
Okay. Thank you. I just had a couple of comments. I know we have a few other presentations to give. I just wanted to first thank Sam and staff, because we're just so light years ahead from 3 years ago when I was here. In one of the first meetings that Brian and I had on council, we had a presentation on housing, and I asked a simple question like, how many units have we done with the money we've already spent? And that question couldn't be answered. And, you know, we just weren't in the space to be able to gather it and have the information to know where the money was going, and we're just light years ahead. So I want to thank Mr. Williams and staff for pulling this together. This is great. I feel good about that. When the public hears that we're spending 10, 12, 13 million dollars, whatever it is, that we can say what it's going towards specific projects and what it's going toward and what it's doing, the impact that it's having. Had some questions on the land bank. We're going to talk about that in a minute. A couple of things that I just had questions on is the impact of Section 8. Is that still, are we still able to have property owners to be Section 8? Housing is, because I hear people have a voucher, but they can't find anyone, or
Right.
is.
So I'm not abreast on any terms of, with respects to decisions at the executive level or federal level of our government, how that has trickled down into changes into our Housing Choice Voucher Program administration through our partner, CRHA. I do know that it's in focus. I do know also that, just that concern aside, there has been an increased effort to figure out a way to incentivize or better partner with landlords to consider more voucher holders. Because even prior to this current administration, there had been sequences of where we've had extensive wait lists, both for the Housing Choice Voucher Program and for our own program, this Charlottesville Supplemental Rental Assistance Program, CISRAP. So it's a policy point that actually it's come up in HAC as of late, Housing Advisory Committee. It's something that staff is acutely attuned to, and we are evaluating it. And I don't have a specific response as to how yet it's impacting us, but the moment we begin to see clear implications, we will be communicating that back through the executive leadership to discuss with you all.
Michael, did you have another comment? Oh.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say to that point, just from like CRHA's perspective, what I've heard is a huge problem before anything happening at the federal level is our average rents in Charlottesville are now so high that someone with a voucher can't the rent is too high in the private market for them to qualify for that unit. So the average rent in Charlottesville, someone with a voucher can't access. So increasingly, the only way someone with a voucher can get any unit is if it was built with public money as a public project. And then just one question that came to mind from points about staff capacity is, obviously, even in our initial analysis, we were never going to get thousands and thousands of inclusionary zoning units, but over a 10-year period, we'll have some amount. Do you feel like staff is positioned to have everything they need in order to kind of track and monitor compliance for inclusionary zoning units over the next several years?
I honestly would say that's a point of evaluation. What do we have, what we need to have gotten us this far, but as that need increases or when those units become online, for example, we'll have to evaluate the level of capacity needed to sustain the service delivery of those programs if land bank happens or if tax abatement occurs. Right now, as we've shared some of that through other team members of the Office of Community Solutions, Councilperson Pinkston has raised a great point in that we've been able to meet some of that demand through our partnerships, but keep in mind too that these community partners too are probably likely to be affected by the changes at the federal level, and they might not be able to sustain some of the capacity that they've been able to carry and have aided us in being able to meet, basically hold the line that we're at. I feel like I've only answered your question in part. Alex, if you have anything else to expand to that, but that's
Let me just
my
add,
observation.
I'll just say that we've known that as development happens, there will be a need for additional staff to work to maintain the compliance measures and even the tracking. We have not gone as far out in trying to anticipate any of that yet because we're looking for the deals to come in. We will learn more just from the submissions to NDS that would then help us kind of predict. So without that input, we don't really have what would be the future output. But we are well aware. It's kind of coded in here that when things are going the way that they should, when we know we'll be adding to our housing staff.
Okay.
I had a quick question I found in my notes. Sorry for not asking it earlier. If we go to the 10-year affordable housing plan framework overview slide, it lists the 10-year housing targets of 1,100 new supported affordable units, 1,300 preserved, and 2,200 households stabilized. Do we know how many people are left over after that? How much of the need does that address?
No, not without doing the side-by-side analysis.
Yeah, like
That's a good
these are
question.
all, steps towards progress,
Right.
but if there's a significant need beyond that, do we need to turn that dial up more?
Right.
That's an important, a very important and good question. Just FYI to that point. One of the ways we can ascertain that is at some point in time, maybe after 5 years or 5 years from 2021, when the Affordable Housing Plan was adopted, we're going to do an updated analysis of existing housing assessments. And on that note, I just want to inform the City Council that at this point in time, the Thomas Jefferson PDC is conducting, they've retained a consulting firm to conduct regional housing assessment needs. And as part of that scope of work, some of the things we wrote into that is to provide or to take a look at a comprehensive analysis of City of Charlottesville's housing needs assessment. And I think we believe that with that, we'll be able to determine who is currently covered, those who are not served, and the extra need or additional needs that are out there, and then how we intend to deal with that going forward.
Okay, thank you.
I just had one other comment, and then I know we're going to be pressed for time to get other comments, but I think council is supportive to continue to be, support deeply affordable housing. I also want to continue a strong part of that being to try to keep the residents in their homes, if we can do improvements and things to keep them in their home, that we continue to do that, because in large part, they already own the home or they have a mortgage or something that they can maintain, but to have that as part of the affordable housing component. So with that, I think that we can go on to the next presentation of the housing ecosystem, the toolkit. Is that correct?
That's just correct.
Okay?
It's the Housing Ecosystem Anti-Displacement Toolkit, and two components that we evaluated. This is the first that we'll be discussing this evening. If you recall, we had introduced this item back in October as a concept that we were working on. And first, let me also back up a step, just in case anyone's just now joining us online. My name's Antoine Williams. I'm the Housing Program Manager with the Office of Community Solutions. And this item on the agenda today discusses the Land Bank Authority of Charlottesville as a concept. It introduces a draft ordinance, but it's not an item for you all to take action on today. It's just to bring you up to date on where we are with regards to our work efforts. So one of the things I wanted to do early is kind of highlight how we got here. There is, as you could respect, this slide doesn't quite do the city justice in terms of how long it's been working on or discussing this concept. But so there are a lot of in-between activities and discussions between these bulleted points here. But the last two is what I would like to specifically point out to you as to the rationale for what informed the draft ordinance that's in your packet today, actually the last three too. We wanted to create a more robust tool than the set of tools we had in existence. The Affordable Housing Plan highlighted land banking as a concept. It also highlights tax abatement as a concept to add to your tool. So we have brought those to you respectfully. With regards to the specific rationales, they're stated there. We have occurrences of rising land costs, speculative development that may happen within our market, particularly because in some areas where we've, for positive intent, tried to mitigate the stagnant development of units in areas by relaxing some of the density or incentivizing density for the development of affordable housing, and increase inventory to kind of support Councilperson Ostren's point that we'll be able to deploy services like our SISRAP voucher a little bit better when we have increased inventory, particularly around inventory that's designated for ADU use or affordable dwelling unit use. So, as I mentioned, you have I'm not sure which page number, but you have a draft of an ordinance within your packet, and it is just that, a draft. It has gone through an initial internal city attorney's office review, and that was really just to kind of make sure the terms were appropriately defined, aligned with, nothing that went incongruent with the enabling legislation, for example. So there will be deeper, I imagine, analysis from the legal team, additional deeper discussion from stakeholders like members of the HAC. And someone was here, that will further inform the development of that policy concept moving forward.
Could I ask a question about this on this slide?
Yes.
The last two bullet points make a point that I want to make sure that I understand, because I'm not sure that I do. It says collaborates with the Office of Community Solutions. It is not a city department, but is aligned for operational and policy coordination, similar to the Charlottesville Economic Development Authority in structure and function, not a city department, aligned for operational and policy coordination. As a practical matter, what does that mean?
So as a practical matter, what it means is that the Land Bank Authority will have a board, just like the Charlottesville Economic Development Authority has its board. And with respect to decisions or projects that get vetted through that process for performance agreements, for example, one narrow example, that authority serves as the functionary body that filtrates those activities, if you will. So I think it's to really distinguish that it isn't the Office of Community Solutions administrating we are not the Land Bank Authority entity in and of itself, right? We are the container, if you will, and staff facilitators that oversee work function and activities in the setting up of this authority, for example, and various administrative processes that may be involved with business functions of the authority.
Well, I guess the question, the analogy that leapt immediately to mind was not to the Economic Development Authority, but to the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority. And I don't know enough about whatever differences there may be between the two of them to know whether there are any differences operationally. Was there a thought that we wanted to be more like the EDA than CRHA? And if so, why? What are the pros and the cons? What are we doing there?
Well, the Housing Authority doesn't have a city department or section that is direct facilitator or oversight, if you will,
Okay.
to be strict. The Housing Authority is a separate quasi-public entity, has its own administration, own executive director. This, again, puts the Land Bank Authority a little bit closer to home in that administrative and business process in terms of operation of the Land Bank Authority, for its inception at least, will be channeled through the Office of Community Solution as it is with, for example, the Office of Economic Development for CEDA or the Economic Development Authority. So it was meant to give you that parallel.
Okay, so the fact that they're both CRHA and CEDA are both, quote, authorities doesn't really tell us
Correct.
a lot.
Yeah, it's just name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just stood up this entity called CARTA, Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Transit Authority. And for that, we had to get explicit permission from the General Assembly. It sounds like this is similar. It's an authority, it's a standalone board, but it sounds like that there already exists within Virginia code the ability for localities to stand these up when they're so inclined.
Correct. The apparatus for you is the Land Bank Entities Act. Yeah, it's highlighted there. It provides the mechanism and powers for you all to proceed if it's your desire after going through a prescribed process. It does require a public hearing, for example. It does require you to draft the ordinance, for example, and also name board members in that ordinance. So there are some steps that you do have to follow to stand it up that aren't as flexible, but yes.
Okay.
So make sure I'm on the right page here in front of me. So proceed on with some of the steps that are before us with regards to implementation. I have just mentioned that it does require a public hearing and ordinance adoption, and detailed what some of those components within that ordinance adoption must include. I want to also emphasize that within this draft, there are some certain things that are detailed within it that are meant to be responsive to the enabling legislation. And then there are elements or components in this draft that are really just policy positions and are open for dialogue with regards to how they are ultimately interpreted or written into ordinance. So I just want to say that there's a lot more work to be done before this becomes a matter of law, if you will, locally for us. So just consider that as well. Not everything within this draft is completely responsive to the ordinance. Some of it is responsive to stakeholder input, some input from various industry expertise, and internally as well.
So, Antoine, a few years ago, maybe, council, we were invited to housewarming, house opening that PHA did for some units over on Prospect, where they use, it's my understanding, it's been a while, kind of the land bank for that, where they own the land, because the biggest part, at least then, was of owning the house, of constructing the house is the land, so.
Right.
It was a land trust.
It was a land trust.
That was a land
It
trust,
was a
okay.
land trust, yes.
Okay.
That's very interesting, the things that I see here we're doing. items 2 and 3, for example, in the sub-bullets, we're doing those things for CARTA right now over the course of the last couple of months, so
Kind of the
that's,
forming of it.
yeah, so it's very interesting. It sounds like there could be some lessons learned from talking with Ben Chambers, for example, about how that worked. Anyway, just an observation.
Okay.
Of course, CARTA is different because it's a multi-jurisdictional kind of a thing.
Yep.
And there is some additional statutory authority necessary for that.
Yeah, okay.
One of the other components to highlight are bullets 4 and 5. With respects to funding and operational planning, and the work plan that immediately follows that, those 2 bullet points, it's a sketch, to be fair. It's windows of time where we believe that those key actions can be achieved. After today's presentation and additional discussion with the executive team, we'll pin this down a little bit more and project out what that work plan will look like. But for right now, the appropriate quarters that are reflected there align with the key actions that we believe can be obtained with regards to the milestones. With the idea that this could be operational essentially a year from now, more or less, given the work that's needed to get it stood up. And I'll pause here if there's any questions about specific activities that are required with regards to creating a land bank. I can highlight a few, or we can go into discussion.
I'm curious about one thing on this page where it talks about identifying funding sources. I had sort of assumed that the funding source was a check from us. Is there something else?
We hope, it's an evaluation. We hope that there are other sources, and not just a check from us. I think one of the concepts that were floated around was about particular, and this is also up in discussion now with some changes that have occurred. But for example, there was a point made about community redevelopment activities and reinvestments, and that's being evaluated to see how feasible or likely that is for our area. I also have been informed by a number of nonprofit entities who are in discussion with foundations that are also trying to explore how they can be more supportive in this ecosystem. So maybe for right now, and I'm
That's good.
optimistic.
Happy to have alternatives.
And so in terms of key considerations, just to prompt our discussion before we move on to the next presentation, these are sort of the questions I've outlined for us, and I'm happy to take your feedback or ideas before we move on.
So, Lord, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the concerns or refinements, as you ask here, to be addressed before a public hearing, I don't know whether it has to be before a public hearing, but at some point, I guess what I'm really kind of interested in is the extent to which the Land Bank Authority of Charlottesville would be sort of, I don't know whether the right way is to put it is just who's in charge. I'm always concerned about entities within the city government, and I use CRHA as an example. I don't mean to pick on them, but we have no real idea. I mean, Michael Payne sits in on their meetings. He's a member of the board, but for the rest of us, I don't think we have very much of an idea what CRHA is doing or how it's doing or whether it's doing it well. For the Economic Development Authority, I have no idea what they end up doing. I know their meetings are publicly available if I wanted to zoom in or something, but I don't have any routine way of knowing. I have to assume that somebody somewhere is paying attention because it isn't coming to me. And I would like to give some thought to how the Land Bank Authority of Charlottesville would work in this way, as we're calling it part of the ecosystem. How are we going to be coordinating all of these different pieces? Do we simply say, okay, it's all Office of Community Solutions is under the city manager, so Mr. City Manager, it's all your problem? Or to what extent is council expected to be a part of ongoing issues in that way? this is not a question I
Right.
expect you to be able to answer, but it's a question I think we need to be talking about amongst ourselves at least before we go ahead and adopt an ordinance.
Okay. Well received.
Brian, you have anything? Okay. Michael, do you have anything, sir?
Would just say, I think, as I've said before, to me, the ultimate goal is how can we have something that gives us more policy flexibility and fiscal flexibility for when, land or affordable housing project comes for sale where there's immediate risk of displacement, we can act quickly. And however it's structured to accomplish that ability to act quickly and have fiscal flexibility is what I would support. To me, the authority has seemed to make sense because that would give the land bank bonding authority, which, isn't a silver bullet, but using the Carlton Mobile Home Park as an example, if there was a legal mechanism by which the city could have paid for that with bond finance as opposed to cash, maybe in different situations that creates more fiscal room for the city when something like that comes forward. So I think there's an advantage there. And certainly if there's any way that it can acquire private capital or, over a period of maybe 10 years, start to leverage its own housing portfolio to make additional purchases, that would be beneficial as well. So over time, it can lean less and less on the city and for the capital it's using. But I do still see like a value to a land bank as being, part of that solution of acquiring land for the purpose of affordable housing, even when some of our nonprofit partners aren't immediately in a position to immediately develop that property. If we can kind of reserve it for affordable housing, I think there'll be a long-term benefit there.
Okay, thank you.
Something I've been thinking about is, Charlottesville is not a very large city. Our square footage is small, and we never really went through a massive financial downturn that left abandoned properties all over the place, the way that other cities have. And so my question might not be something that is a good thing to share publicly, so if it's not, don't tell me about it. But I'm just curious about, do we have some kind of running list of properties that a land bank might be interested in keeping an eye on? And what is the potential for application? Yes, it's nice to have ready to go to deploy as needed, but are there actually a lot of places where it could be useful?
Right.
And so that might be an interesting thing to see.
Okay. I'm not aware of such record existing. I will say, though, that is a question, even since October of last year, that we contemplated, recognizing that Charlottesville's use of a land bank might be a little bit more broader or unique than what other cities might typically use a land bank for, narrowly speaking. So it's a question that's on our radar, but I'm not aware of any record that tells me how many, if we have a blighted property that's ideal for redevelopment, or a vacant property or an infill property. I'm not aware of that comprehensive a record.
I would say that there's not a single source repository. I think you're getting at kind of the point of what we are trying to get to.
Yeah.
There are multiple lists, and they have each list has a different purpose. NDS is aware of where they're enforcing. Economic development is aware of commercial development opportunities, and then we know of city-owned property that's a part of Community Solutions effort, but all in one place, not yet. But
Okay.
that would be part of the goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. I assumed that people had ideas in mind.
Sure.
But I didn't know if it was worth discussing at this point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I don't have any questions on this, so if there's no other questions or comments on this, we can go to the tax abatement strategy for housing affordability.
Okay. So for this presentation, I think you all again for the opportunity. Antoine Williams, the Housing Program Manager with the Office of Community Solution, will actually just introduce the item, but the item itself will be presented by my colleague Alan Purar, who's our grants analyst within the Office of Community Solutions. This is an initiative. The Charlottesville Affordable Housing Tax Abatement Program is, again, meant to be one of several tools that the 2021 Affordable Housing Plan encourages you all to consider as part of your toolkit. You may hear us refer to it as CAT-TAP or CTAP for short, just for presentation fluidity. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Alan.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor,
Good
Councilors, City Manager, and staff. I'm Alan Pura with the Office of Community Solutions. This is my first time at the podium here, so I'm honored to be here. And now that you've heard the Affordable Housing Report and the status of creating a land bank authority, let's move on to one additional tool. Get that handy. One additional tool that's working its way for your consideration, and that is tax abatement. Tax abatement is a reduction in real estate taxes to serve as a financial incentive to building affordable housing, affordable dwelling units, or ADUs. At this point, staff is calling this idea the Charlottesville Affordable Housing Tax Abatement Program, CATAP, which rolls right off the tongue. And this is our first time discussing this with you. On this slide, you can see the core components that I will be highlighting in the next few minutes. Why are we looking at a tax incentive for affordable housing? Because the new zoning ordinance includes the 10% ADU building requirement, and this creates a financial constraint to the ongoing operating revenue of rental housing. That constraint can be quantified as the difference in revenue between market rate rents and the affordable rate rents for the 10% ADU requirement. And there is a concern that this financial constraint may be a material impediment to rental housing construction. So a tax abatement could provide a financial incentive to make market rate housing developers whole from this new financial constraint and address this potential impediment. Well, what are the options, the tools that city government could use to address this new constraint from the 10% ADU requirement? Well, there are grant programs, of course, like CAF and HOPS, and you could consider increasing grant funding. But grant funds, first of all, cannot be given to for-profit developers. And grant funds come from current city revenue or obligate bond capacity. These essentially commit current funds today for ADUs that will be delivered in the future. And current revenue and bonding capacity may also be needed for other city government priorities like education, public safety, and parks. On the other hand, a tax abatement program uses future real estate tax revenue that will come from the new added increment value of future development. Existing base revenue, the tax on base property value, that already exists, is not abated, and that revenue continues to fully support ongoing government services. And that's what's meant by the base, the existing value versus the new increment value that would come from that new housing development. You protect the base revenue that government services depend upon, and you commit a portion of this added increment revenue for new priorities. In this case, affordable housing projects. And this may be an optimal way to make your commitment to funding affordable housing more sustainable going forward. An abatement program provides a financial incentive to affordable housing by promising funds in the future after the housing is delivered, and those funds are not taken from current funding priorities, as it is revenue that will only exist in the future as new revenue comes online from the new housing value. And of course, developers can monetize today the value of that future tax abatement to support the financing of their construction projects. So how would this program work? Well, in 2022, the Virginia General Assembly approved and codified in, again, the Industrial Development Revenue Bond Act, a provision to allow local governments working with economic development authorities the authority to reimburse a defined amount of real estate tax on the new increment value of new affordable housing projects. The amount of reimbursement is based upon creating a formula to reduce real estate taxes that will be owed in order to incentivize new housing construction. That's the Commonwealth authority under which staff is looking at creating this program. Other jurisdictions in Virginia have created similar affordable housing tax abatement programs, including the City of Richmond and Albemarle County. The county created an affordable rental housing incentive program which provides a 15% tax abatement for up to 30 years for projects that provide at least 20% affordable dwelling units. Since Virginia law does not allow governments to directly abate or forgive the real estate taxes owed for affordable housing, these programs create a tax abatement calculation at the front end of the program with a performance grant distribution at the back end. In other words, the tax incentive is calculated through a real estate tax abatement on the new increment value, and the abated tax amount is then reimbursed after it has been paid through a performance grant process. So it's a two-step process. We're calling it a tax abatement primarily rather than a performance grant program, primarily to distinguish it from the grants that already exist.
Can I just clarify that to make sure I understood?
Sure.
If you don't mind. So the county structures it as they collect the taxes and then they give them a check back for the same amount?
That's correct.
And that's because the state law requires?
That is correct. State law does not allow a local government to forgive taxes. You have to pay them and then rebate them back. Now, the one thing I would correct, my answer was the county is currently giving back 15% of that new increment value. That's the cap that they've put on their tax abatement program.
Got it. Okay.
So the property owner would pay 100% of the property tax and get 15% of that back in a performance grant reimbursement.
15% of the increment.
Of the increment value,
Okay,
correct.
cool. Thank you.
You bet.
I'm following.
And VA law and Virginia law requires that a local government affordable housing tax abatement be administered jointly with an economic development authority, or should Charlottesville create a land bank authority, we believe it could potentially be administered jointly with that authority instead of the economic development authority. But wait, how do we know this program is needed? Aren't market rate rents so high in Charlottesville that the market rate revenue will subsidize the 10% ADU reduction? Or if not, how much taxes should we abate? Well, at this time, the Office of Community Solutions is working with a consultant on a comprehensive city housing market analysis to help us establish the extent to which this program is needed. That analysis will help us to identify and quantify other cost impediments that exist to housing construction, like materials, labor, financing, and interest costs, and help us keep those costs separate and distinct from the actual cost of the 10% ADU requirement. This analysis will help us to determine the degree that market rate rents could subsidize the ADU cost. So therefore, the goal of this analysis that we'll be doing over the next several weeks is to establish three things. Clearly and objectively establish if we need a tax abatement program. If so, quantify the need and help us devise a tax abatement formula that keeps the developer whole from the ADU requirement so that the program can effectively incentivize housing construction. And finally, this analysis may help guide consideration of whether to target different abatement levels to different geographic areas of the city. Perhaps the tax incentives should be higher where market rate rents are lower, and tax incentives should be lower where market rate rent is higher, and can partially subsidize the cost of the ADUs. So for now, while we are completing our due diligence market analysis, here are some of the policy issues that staff is considering and discussing with stakeholders in the community. Starting with the high-level options to frame the development of a program, option one, tax abatement should simply make the developer whole from the additional 10% ADU costs the ordinance requires, and then allow market conditions to dictate overall profitability of affordable housing projects. Or option two, tax abatement should be more generous and provide a tax incentive that exceeds just the cost of the 10% ADUs, essentially providing incentives that might kickstart housing construction that expands affordable housing units. How much more generous would need to be identified? And of course, as always, option 3, do no tax abatement, do nothing, and solely allow market rate rents to dictate the pace and volume of housing construction and the building of ADUs. Next, from that high-level framework, assuming our market analysis counsels that we need this program, staff is considering what should be the maximum percentage of new increment revenue that should be abated. How much new revenue should we be investing in ADUs? 15% like the county, or perhaps 50%, 75%? What about 100%? Again, on increment value. In addition, how long should the abatement period last? 15 years? 30 years like Richmond, perhaps 99 years to match the ADU affordability requirement. And finally, once the above parameters are set, staff is considering additional elegance options, ideas that may increase ADU construction through eligibility requirements and bonuses. For example, to even qualify for any abatement, perhaps a project must build more ADUs than simply meeting the 10% minimum requirement. Perhaps we require 15% ADUs in order to even be eligible. Or perhaps we make the abatement richer if the project builds more than the minimum required ADUs. For example, the abatement increases by 5% for each additional 5% ADUs that are built. And what about providing an abatement bonus if projects build ADUs at a deeper level of affordability? For example, those built at the 30 to 50% might receive a higher abatement, or even those building at 30% AMI might receive 5 to 10% bonus abatement. And again, as proposed above, perhaps the abatement should be variable based on location in order to incentivize areas where affordable housing is harder to build because the market rate rents are lower. So, Mayor and councilors, this is a basic overview of the components, the policy considerations, the due diligence needed via market analysis, and that we need to determine the need and establish a rational basis to build an affordable housing tax abatement program. Moving forward, staff will be completing the market study so we have a genuine starting point, and then we will be putting together draft recommendations for your consideration and building a working model that can demonstrate the fiscal impact, allow refinement, and ultimately move towards a draft abatement ordinance if that's the direction council wishes to go. So thank you for your time, and let us know if you have any questions.
Okay. Natalie, I'll start with you.
Sure. I really appreciate the thorough list of what-if-thens that you've got included in this. There are a lot of elements that can go into this, and it's great to hear that staff is leading the charge and figuring out what the best formula is going to be, because there are a lot of variables, and it's good to, of course, compare us to examples elsewhere in the state, but you know, we have our own unique set of needs, and so to see what works best for us is, and the fact that we're addressing this at all, I think is great. So I don't know, that was a very thorough presentation, and I feel like we're in good hands with staff leading this, the charge, and then getting the market analysis from the outside consultant. Seems like a good strategy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Brian? Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Natalie. I think it's very thorough, and the presentation was excellent. It sounds like the devil's going to be in the details in terms of working with a consultant or whomever to figure out, what makes the most sense. I do think we want to jumpstart if possible, but at the same time, be thoughtful about how much money we're giving back from future taxes. I think all that makes sense, and it sounds like there's a lot of work still to be done.
Obviously because there's a lot of work still to be done, it's hard to figure out kind of what specific questions to formulate, but one general question is, to what extent is it legal or desirable to individualize project by project the kind of tax abatement that might be given, is this something where there should be one basic formula and everybody tries to work within that formula to get to the right answer, or is it something where it's being envisioned that there would be a negotiation to try to figure out what a particular project needs in order to be able to make it work?
Well, Councilor Snook, I would say that the ideal is that it has a set formula that's predictable, so that developers know what to expect when they begin to scope out a project, so they know what to expect. And that is, in fact, what Richmond has done. Although they have a formula, it's multiplying square footages by amount of affordable versus non, and taking commercial off the table if it's going to be a mixed-use project. And then the counties is simply, you qualify, you get 15% if the county council approves. So yes, I think a formula that's predictable and knowable is probably what is best and in the literature that I've been looking at. And so that's probably the direction that staff would go, and not making it subject to negotiation to the extent that we can. And I'm not sure the legal issues, that I have to check.
Well, I mean, I would think that that's a better way to go for a number of reasons, only one of which, I mean, there are two reasons come immediately to mind. One is so that you don't have the sense that everything is negotiable.
Right.
And two, so that hopefully when the decisions are made on what this formula is going to look like, it'll be made on the basis of some degree of expertise, rather than entrusting the decision on this case-by-case basis to folks who may not have that degree of expertise. I don't know whether it would ever come before council, but I would not feel comfortable as a counselor trying to evaluate somebody's pro forma to try to decide whether they really need what they're asking for. That's just not an expertise that I have, and I don't know who in city government would have it to the degree that would be necessary to be fair about that. So the more we can get it nailed down ahead of time, the less we make it subject to, negotiation and arm twisting and so on, the better off we're going to be.
Well, and Councilor Snook, it's important that you raised, that was an excellent question and point about the pro forma. And that's part of what our consultants will be helping us with as well, is to help us be prepared to analyze and perhaps have a consultant on call to provide that analysis so that we can essentially be confident that we understand the pro forma layout, particularly if in one of the scenarios that I talked about that we've been looking at is if our goal is simply to make developers whole for that 10% cost, we'll need some expertise to be able to identify exactly what that 10% requirement, the gap between the 10% affordables and what they would have gotten at market rate rent. So we're going to need some financial expertise in the pro forma analysis as well. So you've hit exactly on a point that I failed to raise in one of the other things we're looking at with our consultants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Michael?
I'm glad to hear there's a consultant doing a market analysis, because I think the granular data is going to matter tremendously for all of this. I know when we were developing the inclusionary zoning program, we had a consultant who did rate of change and economic analysis, which looked at variance by neighborhood, differences in construction materials. Are you using that same consultant, or are they able to build off some of the data and research they did? Because I feel like that's a strong, at least, starting point.
We actually have just worked through the procurement process and have on call 3 consultants, one of whom is the one who did the prior, and 2 are not, but certainly either we would have them build off of that, even if they're not the prior consultant. We would have them build off what's there, what we know and what they can know from what's going on in Charlottesville.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's good to hear. I just say as others said, it's hard to know without seeing a lot of specific data. I would just say I definitely think this is worth exploring, but I have a lot of caution in terms of I think we really need to take the time to figure out how it's going to be structured based on, actual data. I'm particularly curious about, do we get an estimate of what the total cost could be, and then kind of figure out, does that even pass a cost-benefit analysis? Because it's not the same as a direct, immediate, upfront subsidy, but it is still a subsidy over time. And again, depending on how it's structured, can that kind of blow out of hand, and is it passing a cost-benefit analysis of what that money could have been used for otherwise? I would also say I'm a little cautious, not that this should exist, but how it could be structured, and that the inclusionary zoning analysis, was done to doing a market analysis, trying to get at what is an inclusionary zoning program that the market would deliver without subsidy. I'm completely open to market conditions have changed since then. Certainly they have. Also that it could vary project by project, location to location, but I don't know, I feel like sometimes there's a reaction of, market rate development isn't happening at the scale we like. The inclusionary zoning is the problem. It's part of the cost, but as you mentioned, there's also interest rates, construction cost increases, supply increases, changes in the investment environment where, maybe their investors just aren't viewing it as a competitive asset class versus other things they could invest in. And so I don't want us to go overboard on this, because I feel like that could be a policy mistake. So I am curious to see that data, and I guess I just want to make my thought up front, and I'm open to data changes, that the program really should be structured just to try to cover the cost of some portion of the affordable dwelling units. We should not be in the business of tax abatements to subsidize market rate development. The market needs to do that on its own for those market units, as well as just being cautious about the length of the abatement period, as well as just how we structure it.
Well, Counselor, thank you for that input. And to that point, in terms of the consultant study and the research that we did, we found at least one jurisdiction that was contemplating a tax abatement as a follow-on to their inclusionary zoning. They did a market study and determined that indeed they felt that the market rate rents could subsidize, and so they chose not to do a tax abatement. And so that's part of the reason why staff has recommended taking that extra step. And then to your other point, indeed, while there is comfort in the concept of obligating future revenue that wouldn't exist but for development, it is always a threat to the city budget. So it's something that you have to take seriously anyway. And that's
right. And I think the question is, depending on how you structure it, could you are you market rate development that may have happened anyway? Are you losing tax revenue on that? And I would just finally, I think looking at it geographic area, I think definitely makes a lot of sense, because I remember in that market analysis for inclusionary zoning, they found it varied a ton versus whether you're near UVA or near downtown where rents are higher versus other areas. And I think, I think they said even without inclusionary zoning, if we didn't have that, development above 7 stories they found was likely only feasible right around UVA, because that's the only area where rents for students are high enough, where rents actually aren't high enough in Charlottesville for a lot of higher story construction to be competitive in terms of the return on investment they need with the investors they have to be competitive with the other asset classes that investors are looking at. So again, I say that as a note of, there's a lot of market forces going on, not just, inclusionary zoning as the villain that stops market rate development. Thank you.
Okay. I just had a couple of comments. One, first I agree with Councilor Snook about the pro forma analysis. That's something that's not my skill set, and I would like to have staff or consultant to review those before we do. But as far as how the program work, I kind of wrote down some numbers because I have to be able to explain it first to myself, but mainly to the public and the people that I'm speaking to, and I like to do it just on the 4th grade level. So here's a scenario that there's a property for $100,000, and these numbers are not, to scale, if you will. And right now they pay $5,000 a year on taxes for it. They build some, new units. Some of them are affordable dwelling units, and they improve the property to $200,000, and so now they pay $10,000. And so if we set this at 25%, then of that $10,000 that taxes they paid, they get 25% of that back. Is that correct?
That would be correct. They would pay 25%, they would get reimbursed 25% of the higher the increment value, the higher tax that they paid because of the development.
Which is 5,000, your example.
I got a little lost in your numbers.
So what I was saying is that now the new property value is worth $200,000, and I said now they pay $10,000 a year on taxes. So the increase is
The
It's
incremental
fine.
difference is
5,000.
5,000.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, so yeah,
So it'd be 25% of 5,000 if your abatement level was 25%.
because they would, no matter what, they'll continue to pay the
The base
The
level.
base, yeah.
Correct.
Good example.
All right, I'm crystal on this,
Awesome.
crystal clear on this now, so don't throw any more numbers at me right now, so no.
Quick question. When is the base amount determined? So like if there's a property and they knock down the building, well now the base amount would theoretically be reduced. So when is that point? Or is that part of the analysis and that's a TBD?
Counselor, that's actually an excellent question, and that'll need to be part of our analysis. If there's no tear down, the base would be whatever the last year taxes were that they paid before improvements began, typically. If it's a tear down, I'm not prepared to address how we would do that, but I'm sure it would be available with the help of our consultants.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I have comments. You ready
Okay.
for them now?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to go backwards since we'll go with Alan still at the mic there. So I'm hearing that you are interested in further exploration of a tax abatement program, because you know I like to do my list. I like to check and make sure I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. And that you definitely approve of the engagement of technical assistance in how we develop that. I'll point out to you that some of the consideration that still has to be worked out is that set of percentages, as Alan described, because I have never met a developer who can't make a case for why tax abatement is needed for their project, not just wanted, because it is a capital stack that they're putting together, and they don't usually have all their answers upon coming to us to ask for anything, or any other party involved in putting their deals together, having had to do those in the past myself. But what I would recognize is that there is an interest in 100% abatement on the improvement above what we're already collecting. There's a case to be made for why that is of consideration, because today we're receiving the $5,000 that the mayor just laid out in his scenario, and the improvement is worthy of consideration for how to use that to spur that activity to happen in the first place. So there's a question there. There's a real conflict there. And I think there's more work to be done, and we will definitely lean on the consultant to help with scenario planning. We've been doing tax abatement in a very limited way already. That is done through CETA right now. We have 2 agreements with Friendship Court, different phases of Friendship Court. And how those scenarios came to pass was a request was made, a deliberation occurred internally, and therefore a decision was made on what we'll take to council. When it came to you, meeting of the minds had occurred, and we had pretty much gotten to the place of agreeing to what the cap is, the percentage is, and the duration. I think we would like to explore standardizing that so that we don't have to feel like that's the way to go about every single project, but that is to speak to some of the work that has to be done. So we're moving. There's a lot more to dig into in that space. Going back to the land bank, I think I heard your question specifically, Councilor Snook, on what is the difference between the land bank, CETA, and the Housing Authority. I think we can put something together on a sheet, 3 columns, to tell you the difference. Make sure that you can see that. They're different, but the land bank is something that, just like the other 2, you will make appointments. The council will make appointments to that body. So there will be direct influence in that regard. And part of the recommendation, I can assure you, will be that 1 or 2 of you be the appointees, especially in the start of this. Then backing up into One thing I just want to state for the general processing of affordable housing in this global presentation tonight, we have talked about adjusting the NOFA schedule, the Notice of Funding Availability Schedule, where we issue an RFP in successive months from October to December, something like that, that we will be moving the request for investments. That's when developers share with us what projects they're working on, moving that earlier in the process because there's no funding commitment, so that we can go ahead and get that information, review it, consider it, and bring it to council before the budget process has really gotten underway, so that we will have your feedback on which projects on that list you might be interested in are prioritizing integration into the budget cycle, so that that becomes now a normal step in the process. And I think that's all that I heard, other than good job to the team.
And I would just say, at least for me, again, on the tax abatement, I think we should absolutely explore it. I'm open to this, the way it could be structured, but I would just want to see data justifying even 100%,
Sure.
as well as open to the question of cost-benefit analysis. If we want to spur the private market, I've read of localities that have done that by seeing, when it comes to like construction of triplexes, fourplexes, one of the biggest barriers is those developers can't get capital because of the scale they operate at, and they've created revolving loan funds where over a longer period of time, the city's actually making money on that. So if our concern is spurring the private market, maybe the cost-benefit analysis is that direction versus just losses for the city trying to subsidize the private market. But I don't know if that's the answer. I'm
Sure.
open to that kind of thinking about it.
Yep. Do we have closed session today?
No closed session.
So if there's no other questions or comments, we will close the, did you? No. You're scratching your shoulder.
Yeah.
So we'll close the work session, and we'll come back here at 6:30 for the regular business meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at recess.